dying and forgotten, until a rancher whispered to the Apache woman, "You're with me now." She was born into a world that seemed to have little room for kindness, a world where the sun burned fiercely in the day and the nights were cold and unforgiving. Her family lived on the edge of survival, always moving from place to place in search of food, water, and safety. As a child, she remembered the endless walks under the scorching sun, her small feet leaving prints in the dry, cracked soil, and the sound of the wind whispering secrets no one else could understand. Her mother taught her how to find water hidden beneath the earth, how to recognize plants that could heal wounds, and how to stay quiet when danger approached. Her father, when he was around, shared stories of bravery and of ancestors who had survived much worse. But these stories, while beautiful, were sometimes overshadowed by the reality they lived in, a reality where hunger and fear were constant companions. Even as a young girl, the Apache woman felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her family had little, and sometimes it seemed as though life itself was trying to break her spirit. She watched other children laughing and playing in villages they passed, their homes full of warmth and love, while she returned each night to a tent that offered little more than shelter from the cold wind. She longed for friendship and laughter that didn't vanish with the setting sun. Yet, she learned to survive, and survival demanded strength that most people could never imagine. As she grew older, tragedy touched her life in ways that no child should ever experience. Her mother fell ill one harsh winter, and despite the woman's efforts to care for her, she passed away quietly in the night. The Apache woman remembered holding her mother's hand, feeling the warmth disappear slowly, like sand slipping through her fingers. Her father, already worn by years of hardship, sank into silence, unable to comfort her. The Apache woman learned quickly that life would not pause for her grief. She had to keep moving, keep living, even when her heart felt shattered. She became quiet, her thoughts filled with memories and questions she could not answer. Time continued its slow march. She watched siblings and friends leave the world one by one, lost to sickness, accidents, or the unforgiving desert itself. Each loss added a layer of sorrow to her heart, and with each passing year she felt herself becoming smaller, almost invisible. She wandered through villages, markets, and dusty trails, but few noticed her. She was polite, careful not to ask for too much, careful not to burden anyone, because she had learned early that the world rarely gave freely. People saw her, perhaps, but they rarely saw her, and slowly she began to feel forgotten. She spent days walking alone through rugged hills, listening to the wind and the animals, who seemed to understand her pain more than humans did. The desert became both friend and enemy, offering beauty in the form of sunsets and star-filled skies, but cruelty in the lack of water, food, and safety. Nights were the hardest. She would curl up beneath a lone tree or in the shadow of a rocky cliff, shivering as cold winds tore through her thin clothing. She tried to remember the warmth of her mother's touch, her father's stories, and the laughter of children who were no longer there, but memories sometimes felt like distant dreams, too far away to hold on to. Even in these lonely days, she tried to help others she met along the way. If she found someone hungry, she shared her meager food. If she saw a child lost, she guided them to safety. Yet her kindness often went unnoticed, like whispers in the wind. People moved past her, absorbed in their own lives, unaware that a life with deep history, struggles, and wisdom walked among them. She began to accept that maybe the world did not want her, maybe she was not meant to be seen. Despite all the hardship, the Apache woman had a quiet strength within her. She learned how to make a fire from dry twigs, how to find water from hidden springs, and how to rest in the shade without drawing attention. She moved silently, almost like a shadow herself, blending with the desert and the hills. Her survival was a daily miracle, though she felt too tired to celebrate it. Each day she woke with uncertainty, wondering if she would see the sun set again, and yet she continued. Life, as harsh as it was, had taught her resilience, even when her heart ached with loneliness. She remembered one particular spring, years after her mother's passing, when she wandered into a small settlement hoping for shelter. The people there were kind at first, offering her a piece of bread and a warm place to rest for the night. She felt a spark of hope, imagining that perhaps she had finally found a place where she belonged. But the spark was quickly extinguished. The villagers whispered behind her back, wary of someone so quiet, someone who carried so much sorrow. They treated her politely but kept their distance. She left the village quietly before dawn, carrying her disappointment like a heavy stone. She realized that being seen did not always mean being accepted, and being helped did not always mean being wanted. As seasons passed, the Apache woman's body began to feel the years more heavily. Her steps slowed, and her energy waned. Yet she continued, because stopping felt like giving up entirely. Each morning, she rose and walked toward some unknown destination, guided by instinct and hope, even when hope felt fragile. She began to talk to the wind and the birds, sharing her thoughts aloud because no one else would listen. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she became more a part of the landscape than a part of the world of people. Travelers might see her for a moment and then move on, forgetting her immediately. She became a figure of the desert itself, seen but not remembered, present but unnoticed. Even with the weight of years pressing down on her, the Apache woman never lost the fragments of her spirit that had been nurtured by her parents and ancestors. She sang quietly to herself sometimes, songs her mother had taught her, melodies that seemed to make the wind pause and the stars twinkle more brightly. She remembered the lessons of courage and survival, carrying them with her in a quiet, dignified way. Though the world had forgotten her, she remembered herself. She remembered her worth, even if no one else did. And so she continued, wandering through the vast, harsh landscapes, a soul surviving against all odds. Each day was a struggle, but it was also a testament to her resilience. She had lived long enough to understand both the cruelty and beauty of life, and though loneliness clung to her like a shadow, she refused to disappear completely. Somewhere deep inside, she believed that perhaps one day someone would see her, not just her presence but her story, her heart, and her life. Until that day came, she walked silently, carrying memories, sorrow, and hope together, becoming a living witness to a world that had almost forgotten her. The Apache woman's days grew harder with each passing season. The desert, which had once seemed vast and free, now felt like a trap, pressing down on her from every side. The sun scorched the earth relentlessly, leaving her skin cracked and dry. Her stomach ached constantly from hunger, and her body weakened, making even small tasks feel like insurmountable challenges. She had learned to survive, but survival no longer felt like triumph. It felt like a continuous struggle against a world that seemed determined to forget her. Water had become scarce. The small streams she once relied on had dried up, leaving her to dig in the sand or search for hidden springs, hoping that luck would favor her. Often, she found nothing and had to wait until the next day, enduring thirst and exhaustion. Each sip she finally managed to take was precious, but even that small relief reminded her of what life had become, a constant fight against hunger and heat, against her own weakening body. Nights were no better. The cold crept into her bones, and she shivered beneath thin blankets or a makeshift covering of leaves and cloth. Sometimes, she imagined she could sleep forever, just to escape the pain, but something inside her would not let her give up completely. Despite her suffering, she refused to let despair consume her. The Apache woman remembered the lessons her mother had taught her, the importance of hope, the value of small kindnesses, and the strength that came from enduring hardship. She would gather edible plants when she could, and sometimes she hunted small animals, using the tools she had fashioned herself. Every meal she managed to find, no matter how small, became a victory. Yet these victories were fleeting, and the hunger returned relentlessly. Each day was a reminder of how fragile her life had become. She often reflected on her past, the family she had lost, and the friends who had disappeared from her life. Memories of laughter, of warmth, and of simpler times haunted her. There were moments when she felt an unbearable loneliness, as if the world had closed its doors entirely on her. She longed for someone to see her not as a shadow or a wandering figure, but as a human being with a story, a past, and dreams. And yet she learned to hide her longing, walking silently, never asking for help, never letting anyone glimpse the depth of her sorrow. One day, she wandered near a small settlement. Smoke curled into the sky from chimneys, and she could hear voices carrying on the wind. Her heart fluttered with a strange mixture of hope and fear. Perhaps someone would offer her food, water, or even just a kind word. She approached carefully, keeping herself hidden until she felt safe enough to step closer. A woman washing clothes glanced at her and quickly returned to her work, saying nothing. A man repaired a fence but did not acknowledge her presence. She realized once again that people noticed her only as a passing figure, someone to be ignored. The disappointment settled in her chest, heavier than the sun overhead. The Apache woman pressed on, moving away from the settlement and back into the hills. The loneliness weighed on her like a stone, and her thoughts grew darker. She wondered if the world had truly forgotten her, if her life had ever mattered. She remembered her mother's gentle smile, her father's stories, and the warmth of her siblings' laughter. Those memories, while comforting, now also brought pain because they reminded her of all she had lost. She whispered to herself in the quiet, speaking to the winds and the animals, hoping for a response, hoping for acknowledgement. Often, the only reply was the echo of her own voice, bouncing back from rocks and cliffs, as if the world itself ignored her. Hunger forced her to take risks she would have avoided in the past. She ventured into unfamiliar territories, crossing ridges and valleys, hoping to find a place where food and water were available. Each step became more difficult as her body weakened, but she refused to sit still and wait for death. Even when exhaustion pressed on her, she would push forward, driven by a stubborn desire to live. She scavenged for fruits, roots, and herbs, remembering which were safe and which could harm her. Every small victory, every meal found, became a testament to her determination. Yet danger was always near. Wild animals prowled the desert, and the risk of injury increased as her body grew weaker. Once, while trying to cross a rocky slope, she slipped and cut her arm on sharp stones. The wound bled, and she had no one to treat it. She wrapped it with torn cloth and pressed it tightly, knowing that infection could be deadly. The pain was sharp and constant, but she forced herself to continue walking, forced herself to keep moving. Her survival depended on it, even when every step hurt. Cold nights were unbearable, and she sometimes had to find shelter in caves or under rock overhangs. She would huddle against the stone, trying to conserve warmth, her thin clothing offering little protection. Sometimes she cried quietly, mourning a life that had never offered her the comfort she longed for. Other times, she simply stayed silent, counting the stars overhead and listening to the wind. It became her only companion, carrying whispers of old memories and distant dreams. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had become both her enemy and her friend. It took from her everything she needed to survive, but also offered moments of peace and beauty she could not find elsewhere. One particularly difficult day, she had walked for hours without finding food or water. The sun burned hotter than usual, and her strength was fading fast. She stumbled upon an abandoned shed, half hidden among dry bushes. Inside, she found some old supplies, a few jars of preserved beans and a small amount of dried meat. The discovery brought tears to her eyes. She realized how desperate she had become to see these small blessings as treasures, yet it reminded her of how little the world had given her. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of struggle, another fight to survive. The Apache woman often thought about her family and the life she might have had if circumstances had been different. She imagined homes filled with laughter, warmth, and safety. She imagined a life where she was known and loved, not ignored and forgotten. Those thoughts brought both sorrow and strength. Sorrow because she knew she might never have that life. Strength because they reminded her that she had survived everything else. She had endured loss, hunger, cold, and loneliness, and she was still alive. Her mind sometimes played tricks on her. She imagined seeing people who would care for her, who would notice her, and who would offer kindness. She whispered to them in her thoughts, hoping they existed somewhere, even if only in dreams. At times, the Apache woman felt invisible, as if she were fading into the background of the world entirely. Yet, even in her weakest moments, she refused to give up. She continued walking, continued searching for life and connection, believing that somehow, somewhere, someone would see her for who she truly was. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The struggle became almost a rhythm, a constant cycle of searching, surviving, and moving on. The Apache woman had learned every trick the desert could teach her, but the challenges never ceased. Hunger, thirst, cold, and loneliness were constant companions, yet they never broke her completely. They tested her, shaped her, and hardened her, but they could not erase the resilience that had been instilled in her from childhood. And so she continued her journey, wandering through the harsh, empty lands, her spirit battered but not destroyed. She survived by her knowledge, her determination, and the quiet strength that had carried her through countless trials. Though the world had largely ignored her, she remembered her worth and her story. She knew that she had lived, loved, and endured in a world that often seemed indifferent. And deep within her heart, a small spark of hope remained. Hope that one day, someone would truly see her, hear her, and offer her the kindness that had been absent for so long. Until that day came, she walked silently, carrying her struggles, her memories, and her quiet courage into the endless horizon. The Apache woman had grown accustomed to her lonely existence, moving silently through the desert, her body weary and her heart heavy with years of sorrow. Every day was a challenge, but somehow she had survived, driven by a stubborn spark deep within her. She had long stopped expecting kindness from the world, and yet, somewhere beneath the layers of pain, she still carried a faint hope, a fragile belief that someone, somewhere might notice her, might see her not as a shadow, but as a human being with a story worth hearing. It was on a cold morning, just as the first rays of the sun painted the desert with soft golden light, that she sensed something different. The air was crisp and still, the usual wind that carried whispers and echoes of the desert momentarily absent. She moved slowly, her feet aching, her body trembling from the cold, when she noticed a figure in the distance. At first, she thought it was another traveler passing by, perhaps someone who would ignore her like everyone else. But something about the figure's posture, the way he approached the land, made her pause. The man was a rancher, a quiet presence in the vast wilderness, accustomed to the solitude of wide-open spaces and the rhythms of the land. He had been tending to his cattle when he noticed movement near the edge of a dry creek bed. At first, he thought it might be a stray animal or perhaps another worker from a nearby settlement. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman, thin and fragile, her clothing worn and patched, her hair tangled and dusty. There was something about her that made him slow his steps. Her eyes, though tired and shadowed with years of pain, held a depth he could not ignore. The Apache woman sensed him approaching, and instinctively she crouched low, trying to make herself invisible. Years of being overlooked had taught her caution. She had learned that most people would turn away, ignore her presence, or worse, treat her with suspicion. But as he drew nearer, she felt no threat in him. There was a gentleness in his movements, a careful attention that made her heart race in a way it had not in years. She wanted to run, to hide, but her body was weak, and her legs refused to carry her swiftly. She could only watch, frozen, as he stopped a few steps away, his eyes meeting hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. The desert held its breath around them, the wind pausing as if waiting for this encounter to unfold. The rancher knelt slowly, bringing himself down to her level, careful not to startle her. He spoke softly, almost as if he were addressing a frightened animal rather than a human being. "You're with me now." Those words were simple, yet they carried a weight that shook the Apache woman to her core. She had not heard kindness spoken to her in decades. She had not felt the warmth of compassion or the recognition of her existence in years. The words sank into her like sunlight breaking through a long, dark storm. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt seen. Not as a shadow, not as a ghost, not as a wandering figure to be ignored, but as a person. Her lips parted and she tried to speak, but the years of isolation had left her voice fragile. She could only whisper almost to herself. I do," her words faltered, unable to capture the depth of her disbelief and relief. The rancher did not press her, did not demand that she answer. He simply remained there, calm and patient, letting her realize that his offer of care was genuine. She felt tears welling in her eyes, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and a joy she had not known in years. Her body trembled not from cold alone, but from the overwhelming realization that someone had extended their hand to her, someone had chosen to notice her, someone had decided she mattered. Slowly, she nodded, a small, hesitant gesture, and the rancher smiled gently. He offered her his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, she took it. That single touch, warm and steady, felt like a bridge between the life she had endured and the life that might still be possible. He helped her to her feet, supporting her fragile frame as they walked together toward his ranch. She was weak, and her steps were unsteady, but for the first time in years she did not feel alone. The rancher spoke softly as they moved, sharing simple words of reassurance, letting her know that she was safe, that she would not be abandoned, that she was welcome. The Apache woman clung to these words, letting them wrap around her like a blanket, soothing the years of neglect and sorrow. Along the way, she noticed small details she had long forgotten: the smell of fresh grass, the warmth of the sun on her back, the distant sound of cattle lowing in the fields. These ordinary things, once unnoticed, now filled her with a quiet wonder. She realized how long it had been since she had felt the world in such a tangible, gentle way. Every step, every breath, every glance became a small miracle, a reminder that life could still hold beauty and care. At the ranch, the rancher led her to a simple cabin. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow that made the shadows on the walls dance. He offered her water and a small meal, which she accepted with trembling hands. As she ate, she felt a strange mixture of gratitude and disbelief. How could someone show such kindness simply because they chose to? How could someone care without expecting anything in return? These questions had no easy answers, but the Apache woman allowed herself to feel the relief of being noticed, of being valued. Over the next hours, the rancher did not rush her, did not ask intrusive questions, and did not treat her as a charity case. Instead, he offered her presence, patience, and understanding. He spoke of the land, of his work, of the rhythm of life on the ranch, gently inviting her into a space where she could feel safe. She listened, cautiously at first, her body tense with the habit of mistrust, but gradually, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing slowed, and the tightness in her chest began to ease. She had spent so long surviving alone that she had forgotten how it felt to simply be cared for. As evening fell, the Apache woman sat by the fire, feeling warmth seep into her bones. The rancher handed her a blanket and offered a place to rest, which she accepted without hesitation. For the first time in years, she closed her eyes without fear, allowing herself to drift into sleep. The fear of being forgotten, of being ignored or abandoned, lifted slightly, replaced by a fragile trust that perhaps she had finally found a safe place. That night, as she lay near the fire, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the harsh deserts, the lonely nights, the hunger and the cold. She thought of all the people who had passed by without seeing her, all the times she had whispered to the wind in the hope that someone, anyone, would listen. And now, here she was, finally seen, finally noticed, finally offered a chance to be part of a life that valued her. The contrast was overwhelming, and yet it filled her with a quiet hope she had almost forgotten. Over the next few days, the Apache woman began to regain some of her strength. The rancher brought her food, clean water, and clothing. He taught her about the rhythms of ranch life, about caring for the land and the animals, about the small, everyday acts that built a life of stability. She listened attentively, learning with a sense of purpose that had been absent in her lonely wanderings. Each day she felt a little stronger, a little more human, and a little more connected to the world around her. It was not an easy transition. Years of isolation had left deep marks on her heart. She struggled with trust, feared abandonment, and sometimes felt unworthy of the kindness being offered. Yet, the rancher's quiet patience and consistent care slowly helped her heal. She realized that she did not have to be alone anymore, that she could rely on someone without fear, and that her life could have meaning beyond mere survival. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future. She imagined laughter, friendship, and warmth. She imagined being part of a community, of having people who recognized her value and cared for her. She imagined a life where she could contribute, where her presence mattered, where her story would be remembered. The spark of hope that had carried her through the desert all those years now grew into a small flame, a guiding light leading her away from the shadows of the past. And so, the Apache woman's life began to change. She was no longer invisible, no longer ignored. She had been seen, rescued not just in body but in spirit. The rancher's simple words, "You're with me now," had become a turning point, a promise of care, of attention, of belonging. For the first time in years, she felt that she could rest, that she could heal, and that she could be more than a shadow wandering the desert. She had found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and that made all the difference. The Apache woman's days on the ranch began to take on a new rhythm. For the first time in many years, she felt the warmth of routine, the simple comforts of safety and care. The rancher never rushed her. He allowed her to adjust to this new life at her own pace. Each morning, she woke to the sound of birds singing, the distant lowing of cattle, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. These small sounds, which she had long forgotten, filled her with a sense of peace she had never known in her years of wandering. At first, she remained cautious. Trust had been difficult for her in the past, and the years of being overlooked and abandoned had left deep scars. She was careful with her words and hesitant to reveal too much about herself. But the rancher's consistent kindness and gentle manner gradually chipped away at her walls. He did not demand stories, nor did he question her past. Instead, he offered presence, a quiet companionship that allowed her to feel safe without feeling pressured. Slowly, she began to speak, sharing small details about herself, fragments of memories that had long been buried under sorrow and hardship. She spoke of her childhood, of her mother's gentle hands teaching her the ways of the desert, of her father's stories that painted vivid pictures of bravery and resilience. She spoke of the siblings she had loved and lost, of friends who had vanished from her life, and of nights spent alone under the vast, unending sky. Her voice was soft at first, hesitant and trembling, but each word was a step toward healing. The rancher listened without interruption, without judgment, allowing her to unfold her story at her own pace. He acknowledged her experiences with quiet empathy, making her feel seen in a way the world had never done before. Days turned into weeks, and the Apache woman began to regain her physical strength. Her body, once fragile from hunger and hardship, slowly recovered under proper care, nourishment, and rest. She learned to take simple walks around the ranch, to help with small chores, and to interact with the animals. She discovered a sense of purpose in feeding the cattle, collecting eggs, and tending to the land. These small acts, though ordinary to others, became deeply meaningful to her. She realized that she could contribute, that she could be useful, and that she had a place where she belonged. The rancher introduced her to the routines of ranch life patiently. He showed her how to care for the animals, how to mend fences, and how to manage the small garden he maintained. The Apache woman listened attentively, learning quickly and efficiently. She found joy in these tasks, a satisfaction that came from tangible work and the ability to see results. For the first time in years, she felt capable, valuable, and connected to the world around her. Her days were no longer a struggle merely to survive. They had purpose, structure, and a sense of contribution. Beyond physical recovery, the Apache woman began to heal emotionally. She found comfort in the rancher's presence, in his steady kindness, and in the simple rituals of daily life. He never forced conversation or interaction, allowing her to participate as much or as little as she wished. She realized that trust could be rebuilt, that human connection could exist without pain or betrayal. Slowly, she allowed herself to laugh again, first in small bursts at minor mishaps, then in fuller, more genuine moments of joy. The sound of her laughter startled her at first. It had been so long since she had heard it, but soon it became a reminder that she was alive, fully alive, and capable of happiness. The Apache woman also began to form connections with the animals on the ranch. She discovered that she had a natural ability to understand them, to sense their moods and needs. The cattle responded to her calm presence, the chickens followed her around the yard, and even the old horse she helped feed seemed to trust her in a way it had not trusted anyone else. These interactions, small and quiet, became a source of comfort and reassurance. They reminded her that she was capable of forming bonds, of caring, and of being cared for in return. As time passed, the Apache woman began to engage more with the rancher in conversation. They spoke of the land, of the changing seasons, of the cycles of life and growth. The rancher shared stories of his own life, of hardships he had faced, and of the lessons he had learned from tending the land. She listened, asked questions, and gradually began to share her own insights and wisdom, gained through years of survival and experience. Though she had once been invisible and forgotten, she realized that her story, her knowledge, and her perspective mattered. The rancher never treated her as someone who needed to be rescued permanently. Instead, he treated her as an equal, a companion, and someone whose presence enriched the life of the ranch. This approach allowed her to regain confidence in herself, to see that she was not just surviving, but thriving in a new and nurturing environment. The Apache woman began to take pride in her abilities, in her capacity to care, and in the small but meaningful contributions she made each day. Beyond the ranch and its animals, the Apache woman also began to feel a sense of belonging to the broader world again. She walked through nearby fields, observing the natural beauty around her. The way the sun cast shadows over the hills, the patterns of clouds drifting across the sky, the songs of birds at dawn. She noticed details she had long forgotten, small wonders that had been invisible during her years of struggle. Each observation, each quiet moment of appreciation, reinforced her sense that life could still hold beauty and meaning. The rancher, aware of her past and her fragility, never pushed her to confront painful memories before she was ready. Yet, through gentle encouragement and patient companionship, she began to share more of her experiences with him. She spoke of her family, her childhood, her losses, and her hopes. Each conversation allowed her to process her past, to release some of the sorrow she had carried for so long. She realized that telling her story and having someone listen without judgment was a powerful form of healing. One morning, as they walked together along the edge of the ranch, the Apache woman paused to look at the horizon. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she now had, a life filled with care, purpose, and connection. She understood that she had been given a second chance, that the kindness of one person had transformed her existence. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream, to imagine a future where she could continue to grow, to contribute, and to be part of a community that valued her presence. Her transformation was not only physical or emotional, but also spiritual. The Apache woman began to reconnect with her own sense of identity, to honor the traditions and teachings of her people, and to carry forward the wisdom she had inherited. She realized that she could preserve her heritage while embracing a new life, and that her past, though filled with hardship, had given her strength, resilience, and insight. She began to tell stories quietly to herself, practicing the lessons of her ancestors and considering ways to share them with those around her when the time was right. Over the months, the Apache woman became an integral part of the ranch. She contributed to daily tasks, offered insight into the care of animals, and even began to teach some of the younger workers the skills she had learned in her youth: how to find water, how to recognize plants, and how to survive in harsh conditions. The rancher encouraged this, proud of her growth and her willingness to share knowledge. She had gone from a woman forgotten by the world to someone whose presence and wisdom enriched the lives of others. Slowly but surely, the Apache woman learned to trust, to hope, and to believe in herself once more. She realized that her life mattered, that her experiences were valuable, and that she could create meaningful connections. The wounds of her past remained, but they no longer defined her. She had found a place where she was seen, heard, and respected, a place where she could heal, grow, and finally live fully. In these days of quiet routine and gentle care, the Apache woman discovered the true meaning of belonging. It was not merely a physical presence in a place, but an emotional and spiritual connection to people, animals, and the land. She felt grounded, secure, and valued in a way that she had never known. The rancher's simple act of kindness had set her on a path of renewal, and she embraced it fully, step by step, day by day. Through her healing, the Apache woman began to see that life could still hold joy, beauty, and purpose. She no longer wandered aimlessly, nor did she feel invisible. She had a place, a home, and a future filled with possibilities. The pain of the past had shaped her, but it no longer controlled her. She had survived, learned, and grown stronger, and now she could share that strength with the world. Her journey was far from over, but she no longer faced it alone. She had found a companion in the rancher, a connection with the land, and a renewed sense of hope for the days to come. Every day was an opportunity to heal further, to contribute, and to embrace the life she had once thought impossible. And for the Apache woman, this life, filled with care, purpose, and belonging, was a gift she had fought to receive, a gift she now cherished with every heartbeat. The Apache woman's life had changed in ways she could have never imagined. The days of wandering alone, forgotten by the world, seemed like a distant memory. Now she had a home, warmth, food, companionship, and a purpose that gave her life meaning. Each morning she woke to the soft sounds of the ranch, the gentle lowing of cattle, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and felt a sense of gratitude that ran deep through her soul. She no longer feared the day ahead, for she knew it would be filled with tasks she could manage, lessons she could teach, and connections she could nurture. The rancher had become more than a caretaker. He was a friend, a confidant, and a steadfast presence in her life. He never demanded more than she could give, never pressed her to share more than she wished, and always respected her past and her pace. The Apache woman had learned to trust him fully, to lean on his kindness when her strength faltered, and to find comfort in his quiet presence. Through him, she began to understand that human connection could be gentle, patient, and sustaining, a stark contrast to the harshness and indifference she had endured for so long. Over time, she began to take on more responsibilities around the ranch. She cared for the animals with diligence and love, tending to their needs with a skill born from experience and intuition. She managed the garden, ensuring that vegetables and herbs grew healthy and strong. She mended fences, carried water, and performed tasks that required both patience and attention to detail. Each task was a reminder of her own abilities, a proof that she was capable, resilient, and valuable. She no longer felt invisible. Instead, she saw herself reflected in the thriving animals, the growing plants, and the smooth-running ranch. Beyond her daily tasks, the Apache woman began to share the knowledge and wisdom she had accumulated over a lifetime. She taught others the ways of the land, the skills she had learned from her mother, and the survival lessons that had kept her alive through harsh years. Her stories were filled with insight, courage, and practical guidance. The rancher encouraged this, recognizing the value of her experience and the way it enriched the community around them. Slowly, she found herself respected not just as someone who had survived, but as someone who had lessons to teach, wisdom to share, and a story worth hearing. Her confidence grew each day. The shadow of fear, loneliness, and doubt that had followed her for years began to lift. She laughed more freely, smiled without hesitation, and allowed herself to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. The warmth of the sun, the taste of fresh food, the soft fur of an animal, and the quiet companionship of another human being, all these things became sources of joy and grounding for her. She learned to celebrate life again, not for grand achievements, but for the small moments that had once seemed impossible to enjoy. One afternoon, as she walked along a path near the edge of the ranch, she reflected on the life she had lived. She thought of her childhood in the desert, the loss of her family, the years of wandering and suffering, and the endless solitude that had once defined her existence. The memories brought both sorrow and strength. Sorrow because she had endured so much alone, and strength because she had survived, had grown, and had finally found a place of safety and belonging. She realized that her past, though painful, had shaped her into the resilient and compassionate woman she had become. The Apache woman began to see the value of her life in new ways. She understood that her experiences, no matter how difficult, had given her insight, empathy, and wisdom that could benefit others. She took care to share her story carefully, speaking of hardship, endurance, and hope in ways that inspired those who listened. She found that people were eager to hear her experiences, to learn from her perspective, and to appreciate the strength she had cultivated over years of struggle. What had once been ignored, overlooked, and forgotten was now valued, respected, and remembered. Her connection to the rancher grew stronger as well. They spoke often, not just of practical matters, but of life, hope, and dreams. He encouraged her to envision a future beyond survival, to imagine ways she could continue to grow and contribute. The Apache woman realized that she had a choice. She could remain defined by her past hardships, or she could embrace the possibilities of the life she now had. She chose the latter, committing herself to living fully, to appreciating each day, and to nurturing the relationships and responsibilities that now gave her life purpose. In sharing her knowledge and experiences, the Apache woman became a quiet source of inspiration for others around her. The younger workers on the ranch listened carefully when she spoke, learning not just practical skills, but lessons in patience, resilience, and humility. Her voice, once silenced by years of neglect, now carried authority and wisdom. She began to see herself not only as a survivor, but as a teacher, a guide, and a valued member of a community that had once seemed unimaginable. As the seasons passed, the Apache woman continued to grow in confidence, strength, and emotional resilience. She embraced her life fully, appreciating the beauty of each day, the changing colors of the sky, the blooming flowers, the thriving animals, and the sense of security and belonging that she had once thought impossible. The rancher remained a steady presence, supporting her without judgment, celebrating her achievements and encouraging her independence. Through his quiet care, he had given her more than safety. He had given her a chance to reclaim her life, her dignity, and her sense of worth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the Apache woman sat quietly outside the cabin, reflecting on her journey. She thought of the years she had wandered alone, of the harsh deserts, the cold nights, the hunger and the pain. She thought of the people who had ignored her, the places where she had been invisible, and the long years she had spent surviving in solitude. And yet she also thought of this life, the life she had now, the warmth, the companionship, the purpose, and the hope that filled her days. She realized how far she had come. From being a woman forgotten by the world, she had grown into someone who was seen, valued, and respected. She understood that her worth had never been diminished, but it had taken the kindness of one person and the opportunity to heal for her to see it for herself. The rancher's gentle words, "You're with me now," had been a turning point, a spark that had ignited a path of renewal and transformation. And she had walked that path, step by step, rebuilding her life and reclaiming her place in the world. The Apache woman began to consider ways she could give back, to ensure that her story and the lessons she had learned would not be forgotten. She shared her knowledge of the land, of survival skills, and of the traditions she had inherited with others on the ranch. She told stories of resilience, courage, and hope, offering guidance and comfort to those who needed it. Her experiences, once a source of isolation and pain, became a beacon for others, showing that even in the face of hardship, life could be rebuilt and joy could be found again. As the years passed, the Apache woman's life continued to flourish. She became deeply connected to the land, the animals, and the people around her. She found satisfaction not only in survival, but in nurturing, teaching, and contributing to a community that now valued her presence. She realized that her life, once defined by loneliness and struggle, was now filled with connection, purpose, and love. She had transformed from a shadow wandering in isolation into a figure of resilience, wisdom, and inspiration. Looking back on her journey, the Apache woman understood the profound impact of compassion and kindness. A single act of recognition had saved her, not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually. The rancher had seen her, valued her, and offered her a chance to live fully again. And in embracing that opportunity, she had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her sense of belonging. She knew that she would never forget the years of hardship, nor would she forget the moments of hope and renewal that had followed. Both were essential parts of her story, shaping her into the woman she had become. In the quiet of the evening, as she watched the stars emerge one by one in the vast sky, the Apache woman felt a profound sense of peace. She had survived unimaginable hardship, endured loneliness and neglect, and emerged stronger, wiser, and deeply grateful. She had found a home, formed meaningful relationships, and discovered the joy of being seen, valued, and remembered. Her life had been transformed, and she embraced every moment of it with a sense of wonder and appreciation. The Apache woman had become a living testament to resilience, hope, and the power of human kindness. Her story, once marked by struggle and invisibility, now carried a message of transformation and renewal. She had learned that even the most forgotten souls could find a place in the world, a voice that mattered, and a life worth living. Through her journey, she discovered that compassion, patience, and understanding could change a life forever, and that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found. Her days continued in quiet fulfillment, filled with meaningful work, connection, and the knowledge that she was remembered. The rancher's presence remained steady, a symbol of trust, support, and the enduring impact of kindness. Together, they navigated the rhythms of life on the ranch, creating a space where both could thrive. And the Apache woman, once dying and forgotten, now lived fully, her story honored, her spirit renewed, and her life a testament to the enduring power of compassion, hope, and human connection.